thank you very much, Jonathan, for giving us some time to talk about the Bible and justice.
My pleasure.
You've written some great content on that, and we're using some of your Cambridge papers in this module. So let's start with a question, just very basically: how should Christians think biblically about justice? And does the Bible have anything unique to say about justice that other religions or philosophies don't have?
Well, I think the really exciting thing is that the Bible is shot through with a passion for justice from beginning to end. I mean, if you take the very first verse in the Bible, in the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. Believe it or not, that is all about justice, because immediately that tells you that God is a God of order. We find out that God creates a beautiful world, a beautiful cosmos, and he wants his world to be ordered well. And so immediately we find out that our vocation is to rule and to rule well, to bring creation to its full flourish. And I often think that the fact that this vocation to rule well, which involves seeking and doing justice, taking place in the garden, reminds you that this is what a just society looks like. It's like a beautiful, well-ordered garden where everything is in full bloom and flourish. So right from the word go, we see that the Bible is telling a story which is all about justice. And so it's not surprising then that when Israel is called out to be the model nation, and to stand in creative blessing with the rest of the world as a priestly nation, to stand vis-a-vis the nations and bless, as the priest blesses the people, that she is to seek justice. And so Moses, that seeker of justice extraordinaire, says, justice only shall you pursue. And so there's something in there about the single-mindedness of the pursuit of justice. That means it's line 1, page 1 of Christian mission and action. Or anybody who's inspired by the Bible should be inspired to seek this kind of healing justice.
Is it then about only about putting things right when they've gone wrong?
Well, I wouldn't have thought so, because if you think about humanity's vocation in Genesis to order things well, that's a positive, proactive vocation. Before, as it turns out, things go badly. So I think justice is about bringing things to the fullness of what God intends. But that can't happen accidentally. That requires passion and it requires focus. And interestingly, this verb that Moses uses, and he says, "Justice only shall you pursue." The verb there is the Hebrew verb radah, which is used of Pharaoh when he's pursuing the Israelites after they've fled from Egypt. And if you remember that film, Gods and Kings, which has its problems, but you may remember some of those scenes of all of those chariots and everything just sort of pursuing the Israelites with great determination. And that really has to be a focus. And to the extent actually that slipped off the agenda, that's a real problem for our sense of Christian mission and our sense of vocation. So I believe we have a major task of retrieval to do, to understand what does it mean to seek and to do justice in the modern world.
That's fantastic. And I guess the law, biblical law, has a lot to say about this question of justice.
Yes, it does. And it's important to say in that connection that the giving of the law at Mount Sinai occurs in the context of God having done this fantastic work of justice for the Israelites, which crucially takes the form of liberation. They're in conditions of extreme slavery and hopelessness and degradation, and God breaks into that and brings about a complete transformation of their lives. And there's some evidence for suggesting, as Colin Humphreys in Cambridge has rightly argued, that the site of the giving of the law on Mount Sinai is Mount Bedr in what is now Saudi Arabia, which I think is very interesting because Colin identifies this site as being wonderfully fecund, full of water in abundance. It's kind of like a mini Eden. And in terms of what is being communicated by the giving of the law in such a setting, it's reinforcing the message that this law, better wisdom or Torah or way of life, is meant to preserve the Israelites in the freedom that God has already won for them. So God does an act of justice which is characterized as punishing the oppressor and liberating the oppressed, and so the laws are there to keep Israel in that freedom that God has won for her. So yes, clearly law is central to justice because it's coming in the context of the redemptive acts of God himself. And I think that narrative is a very powerful corrective to people's hang-ups about biblical law. We see it as being in some way opposed to life. We see it as not being life-giving. And yet the dominant images of justice in the Bible, we think of Isaiah, let justice roll on like a mighty river, righteousness like an ever-flowing stream, are images of life. They are images of transformation. And so we have always got to be thinking about what is the way of life that will lead to that transformation of individual life, community, society, that God always intended that human beings should have.
But a lot of Christians today will think, that biblical law is, it's very prescriptive and perhaps will find it hard to make that connection with it being all about life. But I think you're saying that it is very much, and Jesus, Paul, both in the New Testament writers very much affirm that the law has a validity today, but in the New Testament. But for us today in the 21st century, how can we use biblical law as Christians?
Well, the question of the use is clearly very important because things can be used rightly or they can be used wrongly. And it's always been the case that there is a right and a wrong use of the law. So, we have examples even of Moses giving the law and explaining to people, say, well, here's some commandment, and by the way, this doesn't mean such and such and such and such. What it means is this. So, and it's in the nature of prescriptions or norms that they have to be interpreted. So Jesus condemns a wrong way of viewing the law, but implicit in that, and as he says, he goes on to talk about a right use of the law. So to be concerned about a wrong use of the law is in itself to acknowledge that there is a right use. Similarly, Paul condemns the wrong use of the law, and there are plenty of examples of that, but he also goes on to affirm it as being holy, just, and good. So I think as Christians, we are to have the same attitude towards the Torah as Jesus did and as Paul did, which means that we reject wrong uses of it, but we uphold right uses of it. I think within that, clearly the New Testament understands that this is something which has contemporary application, and it certainly does provide us with ethical guidance.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the question of crime and punishment, because a lot of people stumble immediately when they're looking at the law in the Old Testament because of what appear to be very harsh punishments. So help us to understand a little bit of the context of punishment there, and also how our own criminal justice system here in
Well,
Britain.
my immediate reaction to that is to say, well, why would you want to start there? And I think this is all very self-serving, so to immediately jump in and say, but the Bible says such and such and such, is actually just a way of trying to shut down a conversation before it's even started. And so I always question why somebody would want to start from that position. And I think what it boils down to is that the more unreasonable we can make something look like, the less reason we have to engage with it. So let's put it this way: I'm very sceptical about skepticism.
Right.
Yes, but so I would always want to start by saying what's the social vision here, what's the story, and how are we imagining this to help us to live in a creative, relational society. Really, a book like God, Justice and Society is about setting out very positively what that positive agenda looks like. But at the same time, we also have to deal with, as modern law has to deal with, recalcitrant aspects of our personality. We don't always choose to do what's in our interest, and the state has rightly a coercive aspect to it. So inevitably, of course, we're going to find that there are boundaries to community in biblical Israel and biblical law. There are things that you do which put you outside the bonds of that community, just as there are things that you can do in our society that would make you a pariah and put you outside. And in fact, we do live in quite an exclusionary society in many ways, in terms of increasing rates of imprisonment, monitoring, and all of that kind of thing. So let's not sort of get dewy-eyed about that. But what I would say about the issue about crime and punishment is that, well, first of all, I think there are a great range of penalties in the Bible, and I've noticed in some of my previous work, a book called The Signs of Sin, we find that there's just a tremendous range of different sorts of punishments, which can be quite restitutionary in character, and even things which often get touted about in terms of lex talionis and so on. I mean, we mustn't run away with the idea that these were in any way widespread in their application, and also there would have been a lot of scope for negotiation between the parties as to what you ever did. So, okay, we know that King David committed adultery, but there's no evidence of some of the provisions in relation to adultery occurring, and certainly Proverbs seems to understand the implementation of the penalties of adultery rather than so you have this whole fact that, as I try to explain it in the book, biblical law is an integration of different genres in the Bible. You have all kinds of norms being expressed through narrative, through Proverbs, through Psalms, through what we most obviously identify as being law and Pentateuchal materials. So if you're trying to work out what's normative within the society, there's quite a task to be done in terms of trying to integrate, by which I don't mean flattening out everything into some kind of false harmonization, but it's a way of trying to make sense and saying, well, what kind of systematic kind of set of values or priorities do we find in this body of materials?
What about the criminal justice system here, we have to say, in Britain today? I mean, how would you look at that from a biblical perspective? What do you think we got right? What do you think we got wrong?
Okay, well, I think one of the things that strikes me a lot, I mean, I've spent time in prisons doing research for the Home Office and the Prison Service, and my earliest work with the Jubilee Centre then, as it was for the Jubilee policy group, was on prison reform. And one thing that has always stuck with me through that time is that unless we create humane conditions for people in prison, we have no moral authority to send them there. And it's very striking that in Deuteronomy, and I think this is something to say against, I think this speaks against our assumed liberal self-righteousness, as we know, when we of course dismiss all this biblical stuff as being terribly primitive, is that there is reference to corporal punishment in the Bible. But interestingly, what it says is the judge has to oversee the infliction of the penalty, and the maximum number of
lashes or
that can be imposed. It says that no more than this shall be given, lest your brother be degraded in your sight. Now, I'm not making any comment there about the application of that particular form of punishment in a contemporary society. What I'm taking from that is this idea that we are not justified, what Deuteronomy is saying is that we are not justified in inflicting a punishment on another human being that causes them to be degraded in our sight. And I think that idea, that humanitarian concern, is something that we should take to heart. And we have seen some of the comments from the outgoing Chief Inspector of Prisons drawing attention to extremely degrading conditions, and these are his words. These are part of his outgoing report, and I think that a passage like Deuteronomy really makes us ask two things. Well, first of all, how aware are we of the conditions in our prisons where people are sent in our name? Do judges, as in Deuteronomy, always get the opportunity to follow through and see what is happening, what has been the effect and the impact of that punishment upon that person? So we need a much greater sense of collective self-awareness. Prisons are not sort of moral dustbins to where we can just send people and think that's the end of it, because
and think that they'll be changed as a result.
Yes, and and at the end of the day, the people that we send ourselves to, because we send fathers, sons, co-workers, colleagues. They're people, and they are citizens, which is why I maintain prisoners should have the vote. And we should be doing everything in our power not to depersonalize them and de-skill them, but to do everything we can to assist them in what will be their return to our society.
And just in our last minute before you finish, the whole idea of relational justice, which is obviously an important one that you've worked on in the past with Jubilee Centre, but just in a nutshell, what is the most important thing that the idea of relational justice can bring to today's criminal justice system?
Well, we live in a society today which has a very consumerist orientation towards questions of justice. So we've applied free market thinking, and we have this sort of notion that you can increase, if you just have more people consuming a product that you can call justice, either in the form of increasing victims and increasing offenders, the more people you can cycle through, the more justice you've got, because that's all very measurable. And I think that whole notion is deeply flawed. You don't increase the quantum of justice in society in that way. So instead of this sort of a consumerist, market-oriented approach to justice, relational justice is saying, no, the quantum of justice, if you even want to use that expression, is all about the quality of relationships between people. And so justice is not simply about punishing people, it's about putting things right. And it's using the crime as an opportunity to put right relationships between persons. So at every stage, whether it's to do with crime prevention, crime detection, responding to a crime, processing it through the courts, victims, their families, offenders' families, and so on and so forth, through to identifying the most appropriate form of the punishment, we rely far too much on imprisonment. I mean, it's like, nobody would dream about going around a golf course playing, with only one iron. You need a range of different penalties to express the truth of what's happened. Interestingly, biblical law has a very wide range of penalties, communicating something different about the nature of the offence. So at every one of these, and then beyond that into aftercare. So I think relational justice is by saying at every single stage of the proceedings, what will be the impact of this or that upon relationships? I think that's a very valuable question to ask.
Great. Well, Jonathan, thank you very much for your insight and for covering a lot of the key issues that are going to come up in the module. And I hope that you'll be able to give some more input again at another occasion.
A big delight. Thank you.
Thank you. Voilà.
Okay.
Okay.
I wish I had that